The stories contained in this podcast are the recollections of the guests we've invited onto the show. We are merely an outlet for people to share their truths, and we accept no legal responsibility for the stories contained herein.
I'm Kendra Sheets.
And I'm Rich Gill.
And this is Enough, a podcast which aims to shine light into the darkened corners of the music industry while discussing the ways we can and should improve ourselves and, in turn, our community.
Content warning. This podcast may contain frank and graphic descriptions of sexual abuse and assault, including instances of rape. These accounts can be triggering, specifically for those who have also experienced trauma, especially of a sexual nature.
If at any point during this podcast you feel yourself getting triggered, we suggest taking a break and taking care of yourself before continuing. But we do ask that you continue. These conversations are mentally taxing, but they are so important to have. Thank you. Welcome back to another episode of the Enough podcast. I am one of your hosts, Kendra.
I am the other host, Rich.
And we are here with Becky today. Becky is a member of Nathan Gray and the Iron Roses. Becky, if you would like to just give us a little intro about yourself and who you are, how you got into music, and kind of why you're here with us today.
Yes, I would love to. So, like Kendra said, my name is Becky. I am a backing vocalist for Nathan Gray and the Iron Roses. I also take on some tour management duties, which I refer to as chaos coordination.
I did that for several years, so yes, it is.
It's a whole thing. Yeah. A band full of boys to coordinate. So I am a woman over the age of 40. I have 2 children, so it's pretty badass to be on stage at this place of my life. I've been singing ever since I was a wee little girl. I took about a decade and a half off around the time that my children were born and when I was married, but I'm back at it. And I used to just record on Nathan's albums. Like, I've recorded backing vocals on all of his solo albums so far, and just gradually started to lean into the live show even more. And now you will just see me dancing my ass off on stage every time. I always think it's hilarious because if I did any of those moves anywhere else, people would think I was a maniac, but on stage it becomes cool and it's okay to dance that way. And it's not embarrassing at all. So,
well, what's the saying? Dance like no one's watching?
Exactly.
Do that
except
when everybody's watching.
Yes, exactly. And then they made the mistake of letting me have a tambourine. So now I'm like shimmying with my tambourine, and yeah.
That amplifies the dancing.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So what got you started into music? You said you started singing from years and years ago. Like, at what age did you find outside of like top 40 radio, like kind of like the stuff your parents were listening to, or like your siblings? Like, what got you to the point where you were like branching out?
It's funny that you asked me that because I'm always like mildly embarrassed of my musical journey as far as being a fan. Yeah.
I'm gonna love this.
So I was, first of all, like, my first solo was in 3rd grade. Like, I still remember it. I can still sing it. I remember the costume I wore. Like, that was like when the spark happened. And so music has always been this thing that has just been a part of me. Like, everybody has that thing that they've held close, their whole life. And that's been music for me, in particular singing. Like, I can't play an instrument to save my life, which is wild to say out loud, but I can sing my ass off. Don't ask me to play an instrument, except for the tambourine, which is an instrument.
Right.
When I was a young girl, like, preteens, even teens, like I really liked theater music, but I also liked really weird shit like Civil War music or powwow music or 50s music, like nothing that any of my peers were listening to, like nothing at all. And I don't even think I really crossed the crest of coolness until like my junior year of high school, maybe. So I always had these like tapes that, like, if friends came over, I wouldn't really want to play for them because I was embarrassed. I'm 13, 14 years old. I'm supposed to be in bed at night and I'm sobbing to Unchained Melody. Nobody's ever going to dance with me to this song. Like, that's all I want out of I told you.
We've all been there.
Have you? Yeah. Have you cried to Unchained Melody?
Maybe. Maybe once or
Maybe
twice.
yesterday afternoon.
Yeah, maybe I'm doing it right now. Yeah. So, once I got into high school, I was the theater girl, and, did all the musicals, choir. I actually grew up in Catholic schools, which explains a lot about me as a person, but
Me too.
I was, yeah, I participated in choir because it was the way to make mass move faster. And so I could sing, during mass and youth groups and things like that. Until I got out of high school, I didn't do anything like that could be considered a band. It wasn't until I was about 21 that a friend at work heard I sang and had a brother who was in a band, and they're like, "Oh, you guys should like do something together." And I ended up in the studio for the first time ever. Like, didn't know what the hell I was doing, but that's when that type of live music bug really bit me. And for a while, I was sort of like how I started out with Nathan, like, I was the Fergie, the girl who did stuff in the background for everybody's bands. I think there were 3 or 4 local bands that I did like some backing stuff on a couple songs for. So this really has pushed me into a place where I am more than like just a voice that's kind of in an album somewhere, and allowed me to kind of grow musically and as a person, like a female person, a person with a body. Like, I feel like I'm just now starting to kind of blossom in that respect.
When you were sort of jumping on other people's stuff and like
Mhm.
doing background vocals and stuff, because with a lot of times with like music, it's like a bunch of dudes just like in the studio together.
Yeah.
So was it a lot of like you being the only like female identifying
Yes.
person? And
Yes, absolutely. Which was sort of awesome in the way that there was nobody else in my hometown scene at the time that was a female that was on stage or on somebody's album. And so people were like, whoa, like Becky, Becky, Becky. And that was cool. I loved that. And I loved being that female person. I loved having female fans that were like, we love seeing you up there or whatever. That was fun. But you're right, it was definitely also like playing in a locker room sometimes.
Yeah. I don't think that there's enough credit or really full understanding for when you're female identifying and you're kind of blazing a trail through something. It's everyone's like, wow, that's really cool. Like, I've always wanted to, or, I look up to you, but there is so much that you have to deal with to be the person who's doing that. It's really a kick in the ass, like every single day.
Yes. Yeah, you are absolutely right about that. There's a lot of responsibility that comes with it too. So
yeah, it can also feel really lonely. I mean, it's one of those times where you just don't really feel like other people have a complete understanding the same way that you do. Like your reality doesn't really match up with a lot of other people around you because of, your gender, which sucks. I mean, man, that is so shitty to have to say that. Like, Jesus,
it's the truth.
Yeah.
were the guys that you were working with, were they like protective of you and making sure that you were like, felt comfortable, or were they just kind of like, yeah, come in and, do this part and then whatever, we're just gonna like act how we act and you have to deal with it?
I mean, they definitely acted the way they acted. Like, I think to my credit, sometimes I'm still a teenage boy in my head, so I jive, but at the same respect, like, yeah.
In this little scene of ours.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Which is totally fine. Like, I have the sense of humor of a teenage boy, and that makes it very easy for me to be stuck in an RV with a bunch of boys for 3 weeks. Like, but in those days, like when I was starting to be somebody who was on stage and recording albums, I'm not going to lie, like, I'm sure a lot of them were including me because they wanted to fuck me. Like, it's just the reality. And it was what it was. I didn't give in to that, but like there was definitely pressure, but like it was like an elephant in the room sort of thing, you know? And that was like the musicians that I was working with. Not all of them, not all of them were like that. Some of them were not at all. They were just purely like working with a brother. But in the same respect, like the fans were also an extra component because you have a room full of men at a concert to see mostly men, but then there's one female and it's like vultures on a carcass on the side of the road.
And there's always that sort of thing where it's like, is this person being nice to me because they're a fan, they like what I do, or are they being nice to me because they just want to fuck me?
And for a lot of guys in the punk scene, they're like, are they being nice to me because they're a fan and do they want to fuck me?
Yeah.
Because like that's like the best case scenario. I'm sorry, what were you saying?
Oh, no, I was just going to say, like, as we were talking about it, like, I remember a shift where people started to know me back in those days. Like, they started seeing me more on stage and, like, you know, word was starting to get out. You know, this band has this girl, Becky, that's doing stuff. And, like, there was a pivot in where at shows, there's like a hug to say hello to people. You know, sometimes we just say hello to people and we hug naturally. That's like, hey, nice to meet you. I saw you on MySpace or whatever, Friendster in those days. And then there is men touching my hip or my back.
Very intimate.
Yes. I remember, I think I even had like a thing, a journal thing or a poem or something I had written about how suddenly I loved what I was doing, but I suddenly felt like everybody thought that they owned a piece of me because they were all allowed to touch me, because they saw me on stage and I gave them some sort of feeling, and now everybody wants to touch me. Like, why does everybody want to touch me?
When we talk about stuff like this, a lot of times it's just either like assault or verbal harassment or rape or things like that. And people don't think about the, you know, just respecting people's personal space.
I will say, like, this can even happen to me in Home Depot. Like, it's happened to me many places. My specific experience with domestic violence and abuse was very sexually motivated. So I have a very difficult time still trying to learn or accept that I have autonomy over my body or ownership over how it's used and when it's used. That can sometimes play out in the way where if somebody makes a comment to me, I will go into a downward spiral of depression and panic because that comment or that touch has made me feel that my body is no longer my own, or it's back to not being my own because somebody else is looking at it in a way for their pleasure or touching it in a way for their pleasure. And now I'm back to my body doesn't belong to me. And that's like the core of something that I struggle with all the time, is understanding that I do own my body and that I have autonomy over it, and just kind of keeping that with a bow on it. And sometimes little things, and people aren't doing it to be malicious and they don't realize that they're doing it, but little things like comments, small touches that are not just a hug, like things, you know, hands on the back or the hip, like those trigger something in me that is very like, my body's not mine again. So I think people don't realize that or think about that. And it would be a challenge that I would throw out to people to just keep that in the back of their mind when they approach people with words or physical touch. Like, how have I been invited into this exchange? Or am I attempting to take ownership over somebody's person that I have not been invited to? And that, like I said, that can extend beyond like, you know, assault and rape and those types of things. It can be very small things too that can also set somebody off. So
There's also that kind of weird aspect to it where, like, as a musician or as an artist who puts out their art into the world, when people receive that, they take it in and, you know, it's kind of like that, oh, that line was written totally for me, even though they have no idea about who the fuck you are, besides the fact you wrote a song that they really like. And they're like, oh, or they follow you, like with nowadays with like social media, you get this inner look at everyone's lives. And so between these songs that you feel like are crafted for you in some sort of way, and you finding out what their, you know, spouse or partner or mom or kid or dog or whatever is like in these intimate moments, they actually feel like they know you. So that wall comes down where they're like, I love you. Come on, let me give you a hug. And so it makes it so much more accessible for that kind of like over intimacy to happen on a first meet.
yeah. And I think if you take all of that, like if we're talking about, you know, myself and my band, Nathan Gray and the Iron Roses, you take all of that with the accessibility and songs that speak to people, and then you add in that what we do is also very like a mission focused. Like we are very much about a community of self-healers, and like there is a huge aspect of vulnerability together, which makes it very tricky for me personally, to set and maintain boundaries without worrying that I'm not upholding what we are putting out culturally as a band, if that makes sense. Like,
right.
I want to make sure that people come to our shows and they can cry, and I will hug them during the set. Like, if I look over and somebody is having a moment where they need someone, I will get off the stage and hug them. Like, because Nathan talks during our set, we call them little sermons for lack of a better word, but there are multiple nights where people, sometimes it's us, but there are multiple nights where people are crying in the audience. And I never want people to feel alone in that moment. So I will hop down off the stage and hug them, or just, let them know that they're in a safe place, that type of thing. So when we have that kind of experience that we're setting for people, it even more exacerbates that blurred wall of intimacy and knowing of each other. And it makes it very difficult for me to sometimes be able to set a boundary and stick to it. Like, everybody has their own traumas. Like, anybody that's a person has had difficult things in their life. Myself, I come from an abusive marriage. A lot of that was sexually motivated abuse. So my physical boundaries sometimes get very shook. So sometimes I am in a place where I am okay to communicate with people and to love on them when they need it. But I also need to know that I am able to decline a hug if I'm in a day where I don't want to be touched. And it's very hard to communicate that to people. Like, so that's something that I'm trying to get unstuck or kind of work out in my head. Like, how do I give people the experience that they deserve, but also set and maintain some boundaries for myself for what I need? And that's very difficult.
Setting self boundaries is always hard because it feels, at least for me, you feel like if what you're doing for yourself, which is right, what you need, you feel like you're letting someone else down on a consistent basis. But what you're doing is you're draining yourself out, or you're injuring yourself, or you're re-traumatizing yourself through the things that you're doing. And I always feel like such an asshole when I put up boundaries.
Yeah.
Just in general, like, at all, because I always want to say yes to everything and help out everyone all the time, but like, I'm at negative 500 like most days, and I'll just keep saying yes, and like nothing ever gets done for me on a personal basis. So like, just self boundaries in general are exceedingly hard. I'm sure in this scenario it's got to be just absolutely excruciating.
It's a difficult balance, but I also want to be careful that I'm not putting out a vibe that makes people view me as unapproachable. Or, let's be honest, especially because I'm a woman, I don't want to get in a situation where people like, she's a bitch or whatever, like it reflect on my band, she's just being a PMSy bitch or whatever, when I'm just trying to set a boundary. Like,
3 weeks out of 4, we feel like shit, men. 3 weeks out of 4, you give us some slack.
You try it.
Yeah, right.
But I mean, really, like, there is like an extra component. Like, I am also a woman, and I also feel an extra responsibility. Like, how are people going to receive me in that way?
Part of that also, I think, goes to the discussion of consent, where you shouldn't have to worry about if you feel comfortable in the moment, like comforting someone who's like having a moment, but then not have to worry about, someone like seeing that as an open invitation to have access to your body at any point. Verbal and nonverbal cues, people, like, you need to watch those.
Yeah. And not everybody can, like, Kendra was just talking about, like, there's this chemistry of being caught up in a moment, and like,
well, and there's people who aren't able to associate between verbal and nonverbal cues. They're actually stunted in some of those ways. And I think that's one of the hardest parts of, I guess, everything that we talk about, is that every person is on a completely different wavelength. So everything that we're talking about on a podcast to podcast basis is, how do we all get along and keep each one of us safe and keep us each moving forward in this music scene by not hurting each other, but also like you said, everyone has their own trauma. Everyone has their own experiences. How do we come together and kind of like, almost what guidelines can we establish, like, as human beings, to make sure that we're not hurting people on a moment to moment basis? Again, hard, not an easy conversation. None of these conversations are easy.
That's why we have them.
That's right.
we don't have all the answers all the time, and sometimes we just ask the questions. When we talked to Nathan, he was very upfront about the fact that band has a zero, and him especially has a zero tolerance policy for there's any word of anyone being inappropriate or harassing or assaulting someone. Like, I think his exact words were, "We will leave you on the side of the fucking road."
I was just going to say that. Like, those were definitely the exact words.
He means it.
Yeah. That's amazing in today's music scene when there are every other day, there's a different band that has something coming out about them. Is that like empowering to be in a situation like that where you know with 100% certainty that everyone that you're traveling with has your back, has each other's back?
Absolutely. We were even, in a situation once where we needed to fulfill, I think it was our drummer wasn't able to be with us on a tour, and somebody was like, "Oh, why don't you just put out a posting?" And Nathan was like, "You're out of your mind if you think we're getting in an RV for 3 weeks with somebody we've not met or vetted in any way, like out of the question." My bandmates look out for each other and me equally. And I do know that I am safe with all of them, or that I call on all of them, because Nathan has been so intentional about the people that he brings in. As a human, he cares about other humans, but he also knows that his fans, most of them have been with him for over 2 decades, and he owes them safe spaces. He owes them a place that they can come and be and know that, like, some asshole guitarist isn't going to try to feel up one of his fans in the bathroom, or, that nobody is going to let a guy do that to me. He has handcrafted that in a way that all of us, we even joke, like, if somebody after a show, if we're feeling uncomfortable, I'm not going to tell you what it is because then people will look out for it. But if one of us is uncomfortable and needs a wingman, we have a little signal that not just me, but like all of us can use, and multiple members have used, in order to have somebody, come over and help or extricate them from the situation, whatever that may be. So it's not just a safe space for me, it's for each other too. And that's what I love, is I love knowing that my bandmates are my brothers, and that they would lay down and die for me, but they would do that for each other too. It's not just because I'm a chick. It's because they're good people. And we're a family of good people. So it is empowering, and not just on stage or in a venue, like outside of there. Even like there was a situation, the other day in our neighborhood where something happened that I was extremely uncomfortable about, just walking between Nathan's house and my house, which, like I said, is 3 doors away. And, Nathan went out and let somebody know, another male, like what they had done was not okay. Like, these are people that will do that in any situation for each other. And that I couldn't imagine, spending all of that time and all of that space and all of that energy and putting our dreams into one bucket with anybody else.
That's so great in so many ways. I feel like we're kind of in a wild west when it comes to these kind of safe spaces. Just the difference between what punk rock was in the 70s versus the 90s versus what it's going to be in 2025.
I think from a simple issue of safety, like, of course, we're not perfect, but I can pretty much say with a good amount of certainty that 20 years ago, 30 years ago, you would not have walked into a venue bathroom and seen a poster up that says, if somebody is harassing you, tell the bartender you want a banana blueberry martini or whatever. Like, anytime I see that shit, I get so happy, because I'm like, yes, I instantly can't wait to come back to this place because they get it. They care. Or things about respecting people's genders in the bathroom, like don't look under the stall, like these types of things that are creating not just like the people, but the spaces themselves as safe. We're going in the right direction.
Right.
We are going in the right direction.
There's no such thing as a 100% safe space. We're just looking for safer spaces, because for a while they weren't safe at all.
And the mentality, the original punk rock mentality is like, you might get stabbed if you come to this show.
But that's sort of what we talk about. Like, these people who are stuck in the 80s, early 90s, like, oh, this is supposed to be dangerous and offensive, and if you can't take it, fuck off. And it's just like, no, you like, society is changing.
We're supposed to be ahead of the curve, not super far prehistorically behind.
Yeah. If comedians can get it, most of them,
not all of them,
not all of them
win Grammys.
Some of them, yes. Well, that's for another. We're gonna have a whole episode about that. But if they're like, well, yeah, I have to change my comedy because it's no longer acceptable, and it shouldn't have been acceptable to make these kinds of jokes, and that's great. I'll do something else. I won't make those jokes. But it seems like a lot of the indie punk, whatever you want to call it, scene can't make that change.
Well, they're digging their heels in. It's the male culture, really. And it's the same thing that we saw with the comedians initially. And then we're starting to see some of the younger people kind of change. And I think the same thing for like punk and indie and just music in general. I mean, you're looking at bands that, we're all over the, I'm not going to, give anything away, but we're all over the age of 30, each one of us. But you definitely can see it in the younger bands that are 21, 20 years old, even in their teens. Like, they're only playing at venues where they know people at this time are vaccinated, wearing masks. They'll call something out if they see it from the stage. Like, I mean, they're not putting up with a lot of shit anymore. And it should have been this way a long time ago. And the fact that 50-year-old men are trying to get away with things and 18-year-olds are the ones that are stopping them is pretty cool.
It's similar to the evolution of where we're at with mental wellness. I feel like our parents, vodka was therapy. Like, you know what I mean? Like that, you did not talk about your mental health. You did not address it. And like, I'm a parent. I have a 15-year-old trans daughter, and she is like, I'm sad. Let's get some therapy, or just being self-aware enough to know like who she is. The generations that are behind us are going to just keep pushing that ball up the hill. Like, we're laying a really great foundation for what they're going to just kind of continue on. Like, the next generation of musicians are going to just, I mean, we're in good hands. I feel like, I really do. So the 50-year-olds that have issues with it are not my punk and indie anyway. So
exactly. Well, let's get back to a little bit more directly about you. You mentioned, getting these improper hugs or touches and kind of just overall feeling kind of off at shows. Can you maybe dive into some more of the experiences that you've had as a woman in music who's put herself out there, whether it's behind the scenes more so, putting yourself out on the label, or being literally out there on stage?
There's enough experiences where it's almost any time that I interact as a musician or even as a tour manager, like, it's rare that I get away with a whole night without some little weirdness, whether that's coming back to people feeling as if they have ownership over my body, like too many hugs, things that make me uncomfortable, or like, coming to me and people that have been to multiple shows, and I'm not just male presenting people either, like people of all genders who maybe I am uncomfortable around and will come to me and gesture for a hug, and I will have to kind of busy myself elsewhere because I don't want that. But there's also been, times on the other side of the house where I am there to settle, in somebody's office to settle a show or whatever. And I'm walking around and people are thinking that I'm a girlfriend or a fan. Like, what are you doing back here? Like,
right. How did you get back here? Are you lost?
Yeah. No, I'm not. You'll see me up and my tambourine in about 15 minutes.
Money, please.
Yeah. Actually, you know what's awesome as an aside? In Minnesota, when we played there, it was International Women's Day, and we played, and Natalie Fiedler played. So it was, we had women on stage for both of those, and front of house that day, who I did settle with, was also a female. So it was like the only time that I've ever had that much female power in one evening, and it was awesome. But, I've had people like speak to me shitty. Sometimes they'll come back and apologize, venue staff, promoters, things like that, because they don't like the answer that I've given them. And I'm like, fine, ask Nathan, you're going to get the same answer out of him, but probably a little shittier now that he's had to come like tell you in a boy way what I've just said. But I mean, like most of the time it's easy to brush off. Sometimes it's not, and it'll sit with me and it'll fester. And it's like, well, again, I keep reminding myself I am a woman over 40 on stage, and I am everything that I wish that I had seen when I was a little girl. So nobody's going to scare me out of this. Like, nobody. I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing, and people that are icky are just going to be icky.
It's not on you. It's on them.
Yeah, no, I know. It's definitely.
Oh, okay.
Well, and you bring up a good point about representation also. Like, there is something very powerful about seeing yourself in someone on stage, and you're doing something huge for women and girls out in the audience watching you. Like, that's great.
Yeah, I know that because of some of the things that I have received back from people who have come to shows or messaged me privately online. The other day I actually posted a video of a fan whose daughters like were singing along to one of our videos and like singing my parts, and she had a little tiny kid tambourine with like the streamers like I have on it. But like I don't take that lightly at all. And I think one of the great things about us as Nathan Gray and the Iron Roses is that we do have, it sounds weird to say it this way, but there's someone for everyone. So when people are experiencing our show, Nathan and I generally jump off the stage and go right to the merch stand because that's where people like to come to us and tell us how they've experienced the show. Sometimes it is incredibly difficult because we are taking on very difficult stories where they've seen themselves reflected, about self-harm or loss that they've experienced, abuse that they've also experienced. But we want them to be able to share that story back with us. That said, not everybody's going to be comfortable going up to Nathan, but they see me and they might be like, oh, like I need to say this, but I feel comfortable saying this to Becky as another woman, or Phil or Jared. Like, everybody has a place where they can be seen for themselves, and then they can have their stories received by someone that they perceive to be like them. And that's one of the really important parts about how we deliver our message and how we accept it back from people.
So how did you kind of get started with you said you've done like the tour managing stuff also. Is that just with the current band, or have you been doing that before?
No, that is with the current band, and I'll tell you why. Because Nathan gets overwhelmed by the stuff of the band, and I am very type A. I like to organize things. I need things to be a certain way. And he is wildly, frantically creative. Like he can't be tied down with the stuff. And I love to handle the stuff. So it's like, I would never, let's just put this out. I would never tour manage another band. Like, that wasn't mine. Like, that's not something that I want to do. However, in my band, I am able to be a control freak in a way that it benefits us all. And so that's just how it works out. It was like, we've known each other for close to a decade now. And it used to just be like helping with some small stuff, like keeping things organized or, helping keep interviews scheduled, those types of things. But as things started to roll more in his solo career, it was just easier for me to take on the stuff because I liked it. And to be very honest, like, it gave me a sense of purpose. Like, I've gone through a lot of really tough years the last 5-6 years, and it has given me something to put my energy into. So it's like a mutually beneficial thing. Like, I get to create order, and my guys get where they need to be on time. Like, it just works out as easy as that, I guess.
If you feel comfortable talking about it, you said you'd kind of come from an abusive marriage, and abusive relationships are something that we've covered before on here. Can you kind of talk about how you kind of removed yourself from that situation and what it took to do that?
Yeah, I will start by saying it was not fucking easy. It did not happen the first time. Yeah. We have 2 children together. They are older now. There were times when they were both very young that I had physically left and come back. And it didn't stick until the last time because they were old enough to start hearing things or picking things up. And I did not want my children to have those memories. And so it has to be now or never. It came to that. And when I left, the car was in his name. I didn't have a job. I had no family in state. I had no money because he controlled all the finances. I literally left and was like, I'll fucking figure it out later. Like Nathan and some of my friends, he got with them all and they paid for movers. I walked into an apartment complex and I remember crying and saying, I have no job. I have no way to pay for this. I don't have anything to show you that I can pay for this, but I need a place to be for myself and my kids that is far enough away from their father, but where they can still catch their bus to school. I need you to just trust me. And it was like every move after that was the same thing. Like, we'll figure it out as we go. We'll figure it out as we go. Like, I don't have a choice. Like, okay, now I have a place. Now how the fuck do I place this? Or how do I get food? You know, like it was like, okay, if we just do one more thing. It was about 2 years after I finally left. A mutual friend of Nathan's actually helped me get a job where I still work now. It's an incredible job. I work in a very loving culture. I was like, I have been in survival mode since I left my marriage. I am drinking every night to go to sleep without nightmares. I don't drink during the day, but I can't function because I am terrified of all of these memories that are just ready to bubble over. And I knew that I needed to address the abuse, address the trauma, but I tried to go to therapy 2-3 sessions maybe, but going to therapy and talking about those things and then having to go home alone and sit on the floor and cry in those memories without anybody to pick me up was so difficult. I was like, I can't, I've got to put food on the table. So I made the decision that I was going to move to Maryland and I was going to have the kids remain in their school system. And I was going to move here by myself and get myself put back together so that I could be the mom they deserve. I got here and like, as soon as it was like a few weeks after I got to Maryland, everything that I had held together, just, the dams busted open. It was like, I'm in my safe place now, and everything came out, and it came out horribly. And it culminated in a day where I was driving to work and I felt myself taking my car off a bridge, and I pulled over, had a panic attack. About a half an hour later, I got myself together enough to turn around and go into an emergency room and beg for help. And it was the scariest fucking thing. They were like, well, you need to go inpatient. And I'm like, the hell I do? Like, I just got to where I'm safe. Like, I can't imagine doing all of this horribly hard stuff, leaving my children to get to a safe place and then going to be committed somewhere. So I had to kind of create a deal. Like, I promise that I'm with safe people. I am living in a home with my 2 best friends and their 2 children. I'm living in their 4-year-old's bedroom. Like, I need you to work with me here. So I entered intensive outpatient therapy, and they connected me with the local domestic violence shelter where I received grant-funded, cost-free care and everything that I could need for. I just quit therapy, not quit, but I just finished my therapy with them in January, and it's been 2 solid years that I worked with them. So it was a lot of hard days, and I still have a lot of really hard days. Like, I'm just now climbing out of a over 5-week depressive state, but my hard days are easier than they used to be, and they're hard days where I'm not also in physical danger. So
we supposedly know so much about not mental health per se, but I mean, domestic hotlines they're not new. I mean, there's been abuse going on for a long time, and it's not something that's just come to the forefront recently. But in these scenarios, it's so bizarre to me to hear what the go-to like checklist of items is, which is, oh, you have a history of all these things. Well, we're just going to focus on the fact that at this exact moment, you had a panic attack and you had suicidal ideation / possible, like moving the car towards the bridge, and they're like, we need to put you in inpatient. We're completely ignoring the reason of why it came to be at this exact moment. We need to be focusing on the issues in the past that have made the person standing in front of you into the person that they are. I mean, half of the things that they're utilizing they're not really viable resources for the majority of people out there. They work instantaneously. It's kind of like, celebrities going to rehab. You see them, they go in, they're in 90 days, and then you see them at the bar, or they're, running around in a limo. Like it works momentarily because it gets them away from the situation. It gets them working on something mentally. So they're not focused on what's going on. They're safe, but then it puts them back out into the world without any coping mechanisms or tools.
I will say, like, in retrospect, I can look back and say, okay, that was them needing to cover their asses. Like, what if, you know what I mean? But the thing that did come out of it was it did connect me to the shit I needed. So
exactly.
In a really hard moment, it was the scariest fucking place I've ever been, like in the back corner of the ER with like, somebody sitting at the door watching me, taking everything away from me. And like, but I didn't even know that there was a domestic violence shelter. Like, I can walk to it from my house. The services that it did connect me with when I was in an unsafe moment, that was the most immediate way to get what I needed. And it's not the most fun or the most cost effective, but it fucking worked.
Outside of Nathan and his family, did you have support from your family and other friends when you sort of extricated yourself from that situation?
I had one friend. I didn't really have many friends left because, I mean, it was control, right? Like I wasn't.
Imagine that.
Yeah.
Remove them one by one.
Yes. Like in the beginning, I could go but then like it got easier to not because he would show up or there would be lots of texts and berating and like, get your app, you know what I mean? So it made it not worth it. So by the time I left, I had one person who I could turn to. My family, they live in North Carolina. My father died in a plane crash when I was 13. So it's just my mom and my brother and I, but my mom and my brother and I are not close. They are not, like, if I think of people that I need to call in a hard moment, it's not them. Like they're my family, but so I really felt stranded and I knew that it just, again, I had to figure it out as I went. I mean, that's what women do. We figure it out as we go.
You have to. That kind of, yeah. One day at a time, like you were saying, it wasn't even one day. It was one choice at a time. I've solved the apartment. Now, how do we get dinner? What do we do tomorrow? Do I need to get a job? How am I going to get there? There's no car. I mean, it's just issue after issue. And that it does help that you said you are a type A personality because we love solving a big problem or about yes. 40 of them in less than 20 minutes. So I'm sure that was probably why you were so successful in being able to extricate yourself and get yourself into a safe place and into where you are today, which is great.
Well, and also, that's sort of a good example of how this sort of chosen family that we kind of pick for ourselves are the ones who a lot of times are really there for you when you don't have like blood family to be those people.
Yeah, to be the support system.
Like I said, I lived in Nathan and Katie's daughter's room. Like I lived in their home for as long as I needed. And, my children have spent Thanksgiving with Nathan's parents. It is that kind of thing. And it does also help to have a chosen family who sees you and doesn't ask you to be any particular way. I mean, Nathan, I know you guys have talked to him, like he has his own mental health challenges and his own history of trauma. And sometimes we joke like, I need you to not be a mess today because I need to be a mess today. Like we can't both be a mess at the same time.
Yeah.
Sometimes it doesn't work out that way and we're just both very messy. But it does help to have chosen family who you don't have to worry about being asked every 5 seconds, like, are you okay? Like, how are you? Like people that just know that you need space, that you need to not be alone. Like there's different, those nuances. So I lucked out.
Also, like when you were saying, don't be a mess, I'm going to be a mess. And you're able to talk to somebody that's more like a peer. And we were mentioning with like, parents or people of a certain age, they don't really quite understand because they were not raised in a culture that sits and listens to mental health related therapy issues. They think You just suck it up and keep moving. That's what we did. Didn't have the money, then you get another job. And
that's why I am like very intentional about being open in that respect with my children. Like I've never disclosed to them like why I left or what my experiences were like, because that won't benefit them right now. I feel like eventually they'll probably come to me and ask, and maybe they'll have figured it out. I don't want to make an enemy of their father to them.
They still have a good relationship with him?
Yes, they do. So I always make sure that I'm very open about like, oh, I went to therapy today and my April said like this or this. Like I'm open about like when I need to take meds, or like, I'm very open about that because I want them to know it's okay, and model that for them, because I don't want them to have that sort of relationship with mental health that my mother and I did. Like I want it to be like a, hell yeah, I have a therapist. Like you can't imagine what I'd be like without her. Like I need it to be something that is very normal as like going to the dentist. So I make sure that I'm vocal about it in that respect.
It is. I mean, it's mental health, it's physical health. We've talked about this before. Your brain is in your body. So why would it not be considered physical health? It's only beneficial to be open about it. It should not be stigmatized, because we'll end up in the scenarios that we've been talking about here, where there's people who aren't able to properly process their trauma and therefore traumatize other people or re-traumatize other people. So I think what you're doing really is the right way of going through it. And I hope that they're receptive to that. I'm sure that they are.
Oh, they are. Yeah.
Do they have their own therapists?
So my oldest does now, and it was very like easy. Like she was not feeling herself. Like a lot of that comes with being 15 and a person who is trans. That's a lot, right?
Yeah.
So
being 15 alone is a lot. So putting on top of that
extra stuff, but she's very open to it. And I think it helps that they have seen who I am now compared to who I was 2 years ago. Like I actually haven't had a drink in 3 years because I don't need that as a coping mechanism anymore. Like I still have, nightmares and shit, but I double down on melatonin instead. But like they see that I am a more present mother. They see the fruits of my labor, I guess, is the way to see it or to say it. And so me being vocal about how I got there just shows them like, oh, like, well, mom used to like be a mess. We never knew why, but now she seems to be doing great. We have great fun together. I feel like I can talk to her. Like having my 15-year-old first tell me they were bi, which I was like, yeah, I know. Big surprise. Mom knew. But then like, yeah, recognizing like that there was also like some gender identity things. And then like, okay, my child, I'm going to set a space for them to come to me and say what they need to say when they're ready. I would still be an advocate for them if I hadn't done all that work for myself, but I don't know that I would have been the best advocate like I am now.
Well, and part of that is also like admitting like to yourself and to your kids and to other people, like, I don't always have all the answers and sometimes I need a little help. And we all sometimes need a little help. Enough is a podcast centering on abuse, harassment, and assault in the music scene. To help get the word out, please like or subscribe and share with your friends. If you have been on the receiving end of harm from someone, be it artist, venue owner, audience member, or someone else, and would like to share your story on a future episode, please reach out to us at thisisenoughpodcast@gmail.com. All correspondences are kept confidential.